Garrett Hayes stood with his back to the door, his sharp blue suit blending with the grey tones of the evening cityscape. His hands were stuffed into his pockets, tension radiating from every line of his tall frame. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing the opulent top floor of Hayes Tower. The sprawling office was encased in glass, offering a breathtaking view of the San Francisco skyline. "Garrett," a voice called, breaking the silence. Trevor Blake entered, his easy grin in stark contrast to Garrett's stormy expression. "We need to talk. The Sterling deal hinges on this dinner and—" He paused, studying his friend. "You're still brooding, aren't you?" Garrett turned slowly, his expression icy. "Brooding? Hardly. Just re-evaluating why I let you drag me into this nonsense." Trevor chuckled, unfazed. "This nonsense is the only way we get Walter Sterling to invest in vision tech. The man's old school, Garrett. You know what he values most: family. A partner who's settled, stable. I've built a multi-billion-dollar company from scratch," Garrett snapped, his voice cutting through the air. "That should be enough." "But it's not," Trevor countered, leaning casually against the sleek black desk. "He's made it clear. No fiancé, no deal. And without this deal, Vision Tech's expansion plans are dead in the water." Garrett's jaw tightened. He loathed this kind of charade, but Trevor's words carried weight. Walter Sterling was a traditionalist, and his investment could be the game-changer Vision Tech needed to launch its next revolutionary AI project. "So, what's your plan?" Garrett asked coolly, his eyes narrowing. "Or do you expect me to conjure a fiancé out of thin air?" Trevor smirked, his hazel eyes twinkling with mischief. "Not exactly thin air. I've already been thinking ahead. You don't need a real fiancé, just someone who looks the part for a few weeks." Garrett's laugh was humorless. "You're suggesting I hire someone?" "Why not?" Trevor said, shrugging. "Rich guys do it in movies all the time. We just need someone who can pull it off, someone convincing enough to charm Sterling and his circle." Garrett stared at his friend, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. The idea was absurd, wasn't it? Yet the stakes were too high to dismiss it outright. He exhaled sharply, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Fine. But make it clear, this is business, no complications." Trevor grinned. "Complications? When have I ever steered you wrong?" Garrett shot him a withering look. "Do you want the list alphabetically or chronologically?" "Touché," Trevor said, laughing. "But trust me, I've got this covered. Give me 2 days and I'll find you the perfect candidate." Across town, Ellie Carter's paint-streaked hands hovered over a blank canvas in her tiny studio apartment. Her walls were lined with sketches and half-finished paintings, each one a testament to her talent and her struggle. Bills piled up on the counter, a grim reminder of the financial strain that seemed to choke her creativity. Her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. She glanced at the screen, her brother's name flashing. A wave of guilt hit her as she picked up. "Jack," she said softly, "what's wrong?" "Ellie, it's not good." Jack's voice was tight with worry. "The tuition payment deadline is next week, and I don't have enough. I've tried everything, but—" "Stop," Ellie interrupted, her heart aching. "We'll figure it out. Don't worry." "Ellie, I hate to put this on you. I know things are tight, but I don't have anyone else." "I said I'll handle it," she reassured him, even as panic set in. "How?" She barely had enough to cover her own rent. After Jack hung up, she sank onto her worn couch, the weight of responsibility crushing her. The next day, Ellie arrived at Delaney Gallery, where Margaret Delaney greeted her with a sharp yet kind smile. The older woman had been Ellie's mentor for years, offering guidance and opportunities whenever she could. "You're late," Margaret said, tapping her watch. "Buy an alarm clock, Ellie." "Sorry," Ellie murmured, setting down her bag. "Rough night." Margaret softened. Ellie, I know things are tough, but you have talent. Don't let life's problems drown you. Your big break could be just around the corner. Ellie nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She was stacking framed paintings when a commanding voice caught her attention. I'm looking for Margaret Delaney, the man said. His tone was polished, confident. Ellie turned and her breath hitched. The man standing in the doorway exuded power, dark, tailored suit, striking features, and an air of authority that made her pulse quicken. He wasn't the kind of person who frequented galleries like this. Margaret stepped forward, extending her hand. I'm Margaret Delaney. And you are? Garrett Hayes, he replied, his gaze briefly flicking to Ellie. I need your help. Margaret raised an eyebrow. Help with what? Garrett hesitated, his gaze settling on Ellie again. Something about her intrigued him, her quiet presence, her hands still streaked with faint traces of paint. I'm looking for someone unique, someone who can stand out in a crowd. Margaret's eyes sparkled with curiosity. Sounds intriguing. Ellie, why don't you show Mr. Hayes around? Ellie blinked, startled. Me? Yes, you, Margaret said firmly. Go on. Garrett followed Ellie as she led him through the gallery. His eyes weren't on the art, though. They were on her. She was unpolished, honest, and completely unlike the polished socialites he usually encountered. You're an artist, he said suddenly, breaking the silence. Ellie glanced at him. How could you tell? Garrett gestured toward her hands. The paint gives it away. She flushed slightly. Yes, but I wouldn't call myself successful. Sometimes success is just a matter of opportunity, Garrett said, his tone thoughtful. They stopped in front of a painting, a bold, abstract piece filled with chaotic swirls of color. Yours? Garrett asked. Ellie nodded. It's a work in progress. Aren't we all? Garrett murmured, his gaze intense. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. How would you like an opportunity that could change your life? Ellie frowned, wary. What kind of opportunity? I need someone to pretend to be my fiancée, Garrett said bluntly. It's temporary, strictly business, but I can offer substantial compensation. Ellie stared at him, her mind racing. Was he serious? And if he was, could she really do something so insane? You don't even know me, she said finally. I know enough, Garrett replied. You're smart, you're genuine, and you're exactly what I need. Ellie hesitated. Why me? Because you're not like them, Garrett said simply. You're real. His words struck something deep within her. She wanted to say no, but Jack's voice echoed in her mind. She had no other options. Taking a deep breath, Ellie met Garrett's gaze. I'll do it. Garrett's lips curved into a small, satisfied smile. Good. We start tomorrow. As he left the gallery, Ellie stood frozen, her heart pounding. What had she just agreed to? The sun crept through the cracks of Ellie Carter's thin curtains, illuminating the chaos of her tiny studio apartment. She lay on the edge of her couch, the same question from the night before echoing in her mind. What have I gotten myself into? Her phone buzzed sharply, yanking her from her thoughts. She picked it up and saw a text from an unknown number. Garrett Hayes. Be ready at 10. I'll send a car. Dress professionally. Ellie stared at the message, her stomach twisting. This wasn't a normal day. It was the start of a bizarre arrangement that could either save her or destroy her. With a deep sigh, she swung her feet to the floor and pushed herself up. She couldn't afford to dwell on her fears. Jack's future depended on this. Her reflection in the mirror was far from encouraging. Faded jeans, a stained, paint-smudged t-shirt, and dark circles under her eyes screamed anything but professional. She rummaged through her meager wardrobe and finally settled on a simple black dress, the only piece of clothing that could pass for formal. She paired it with scuffed flats, silently cursing herself for never investing in better shoes. By the time the black town car arrived outside her building, Ellie was a bundle of nerves. The driver opened the door for her, offering a curt nod. She stepped inside and sank into the leather seat, her palms slick with sweat. As the car wove through the bustling streets of San Francisco, Ellie couldn't help but feel like she was heading to the gallows. The car pulled up to Hayes Tower, a sleek, glass-covered monument to power and wealth. Ellie's throat tightened as she stepped out and craned her neck to take in the massive structure. It was intimidating, as if the building itself knew she didn't belong there. The driver led her to a private elevator, and within moments she was whisked up to the top floor. When the doors opened, Garrett Hayes was already waiting, his sharp suit and piercing eyes adding to the overwhelming atmosphere of authority that surrounded him. "You're late," Garrett said without preamble, his voice cool and even. Ellie bristled. "I'm on time. Your driver picked me up late." Garrett's lips twitched, almost forming a smirk, but he masked it quickly. "Follow me." He turned on his heel, and Ellie hurried after him, her flats clicking softly against the polished marble floor. Garrett's office was massive, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of the city. Yet there was no warmth to it. Everything was precise, calculated, and impossibly sterile. "Sit," he instructed, gesturing to one of the sleek black chairs across from his desk. Ellie sank into the chair, her fingers clutching her bag tightly. Garrett leaned back in his chair, studying her like she was a problem he was trying to solve. "I assume you understand what's expected of you," he began. Ellie straightened, trying to meet his intense gaze without flinching. "You want me to pretend to be your fiancé so you can win over some old-school investor. I play the part, you pay me, and we both walk away when it's over." Garrett tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "Correct. But there's more to it than that. Walter Sterling is sharp. He'll see through anything less than perfection. If we're going to convince him, you need to embody the role completely." "How exactly am I supposed to do that?" Ellie asked, her voice tinged with irritation. "I'm not an actress." "Which is why Trevor will train you," Garrett replied smoothly. "He'll handle your backstory, etiquette, and everything else you need to pass as someone who belongs in my world." Ellie's chest tightened. "And what happens if I mess up?" "You won't," Garrett said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Failure isn't an option." Ellie swallowed hard, her stomach churning. She hated the pressure, the condescension in his tone, but she reminded herself why she was doing this. Jack needed her to succeed. "Fine," she said finally. "When do we start?" "Now," Garrett replied, standing abruptly. "Trevor is waiting in the conference room. Let's go." Ellie followed him down a sleek hallway, her nerves mounting with each step. When they entered the conference room, Trevor Blake greeted her with a wide, mischievous grin. "Ah, the artist," Trevor said, his tone teasing. "Ready to become the future Mrs. Hayes." Ellie's cheeks flushed. "Just tell me what I need to do." "First," Trevor said, motioning for her to sit, "we need to create a believable backstory. Where did you two meet? How long have you been together? What do you love about each other?" Ellie glanced at Garrett, her eyebrows raised. Shouldn't he answer those questions? Garrett crossed his arms, his expression stoic. "This is your test. Impress me." Ellie's frustration flared, but she forced herself to focus. "Fine. We met at a charity art auction. You were impressed by my work and introduced yourself. Over time, you kept visiting the gallery and, well, I guess we fell in love." Trevor chuckled. "Not bad. A little cliched, but it'll do. Now, let's talk about how you fell for him. What's Garrett's most attractive quality?" Ellie bit back a sarcastic remark and forced a polite smile. "His generosity. He bought several of my paintings and encouraged my career." Garrett's lips twitched again, but he didn't respond. "And what annoys you most about him?" Trevor pressed, clearly enjoying himself. Ellie's eyes flicked to Garrett. "He's controlling. Everything has to be his way. No exceptions." Trevor burst out laughing. "Perfect. That's actually believable." Garrett shot Trevor a glare, silencing him instantly. "Enough. Let's move on." For hours, they drilled her on etiquette, how to handle difficult questions, and how to present herself with the poise expected of someone in Garrett's world. By the time they finished, Ellie's head was spinning. "That's all for today," Garrett said as they left the conference room. "I'll have someone pick you up tomorrow morning for wardrobe fitting." "Can't wait," Ellie muttered under her breath. Garrett stopped abruptly and turned to face her. "This is a job, Ellie. Treat it like one." She stared at him, her exhaustion giving way to defiance. "I am treating it like a job. Maybe try treating me like a person." The air between them grew tense, but Garrett said nothing. Instead, he walked away, leaving Ellie to navigate her way back to the elevator alone. As the doors closed, Ellie leaned against the wall, letting out a shaky breath. The day had been grueling, but she couldn't afford to falter. Jack's future, and her own, depended on this strange, high-stakes arrangement. She didn't realize that Trevor had watched the exchange from down the hall, a thoughtful expression on his face. He pulled out his phone and typed a quick message to Sophia. "She's feisty. This might be more interesting than we thought." Ellie had no idea that the game she'd just entered was about to become far more dangerous and personal than she could have imagined. The morning sun cast golden light over the streets of San Francisco, but Ellie Carter barely noticed. She tugged at the hem of her new blazer, loaned from the styling consultant Garrett had insisted on, and checked her reflection in the car window for the 10th time. She looked like someone else entirely, polished and poised in a sleek outfit paired with modest heels. Her hair was neatly styled, the usual paint-streaked waves replaced by soft curls. "You've got this," she whispered to herself, but her nerves betrayed her. The car pulled to a stop in front of Sterling House, an elegant private club that exuded old-world charm. Ellie stepped out, her breath hitching at the sight of the imposing stone building. She wasn't sure what unnerved her more, meeting Walter Sterling or navigating this farcical engagement with Garrett. Garrett's sleek black car arrived moments later, and he stepped out, his commanding presence radiating as he adjusted the cufflinks on his tailored suit. His sharp eyes scanned the street before landing on Ellie. For a split second, his gaze softened, but then his usual unreadable mask returned. "You're on time." "Good," he said as he approached her. "Remember everything Trevor drilled into you yesterday. Sterling won't tolerate anything less than perfection." Ellie bit back the urge to roll her eyes. "You've said that 100 times. I get it." "Do you?" Garrett's gaze locked with hers, piercing and unyielding. "Because if you slip up, I'm the one who pays the price." Ellie clenched her jaw. "I know what's at stake." "Then let's get this over with." He offered his arm, his tone brisk. "Try to look like you actually want to be here." Ellie hesitated before linking her arm with his. "Try to act like I don't annoy you." Garrett didn't reply, but the corner of his mouth twitched. Together they entered the club, stepping into a grand foyer filled with soft chatter and the clink of glasses. The space was all polished wood, crystal chandeliers, and an air of exclusivity. A uniformed attendant led them to a private dining room where Walter Sterling was waiting. The older man rose from his seat, his silver hair and tailored suit giving him the aura of an old-fashioned tycoon. His sharp blue eyes flicked over Ellie, appraising her with a polite but calculating smile. "Garrett," Sterling said, extending a hand, punctual as always. "Of course, Walter." I'd like you to meet Ellie Carter, my fiancée." Garrett's tone was smooth, his confidence unwavering. Ellie summoned her best smile and extended her hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Sterling. Ellie," Sterling said warmly, though his gaze lingered a moment longer than she liked. "What a lovely name. Garrett didn't tell me much about you. He's always so focused on work. What do you do?" Ellie's heart pounded, but she forced herself to stay calm. "I'm an artist," she said, her voice steady. "I work at a gallery in the city." Sterling's eyebrows lifted, intrigued. "An artist? How refreshing. And how did you two meet?" Ellie felt Garrett's subtle nudge against her arm, a silent signal to stick to the script. "At an art auction," she said smoothly. "Garrett attended one of my gallery's events, and we ended up talking about one of my pieces." "Talking?" Garrett interjected, his voice taking on a rare warmth. "She spent 20 minutes debating the symbolism of a single brushstroke." Ellie shot him a surprised glance. He was improvising, but it worked. Sterling chuckled, his expression softening. "Well, it sounds like you've met your match, Garrett," Sterling said. "Tell me, Ellie, what's it like being engaged to a man as particular as Garrett?" Ellie hesitated, unsure how to respond without overstepping. She felt Garrett's hand settle lightly on hers, a gesture so subtle it startled her. "It's never boring," she said, her lips curving into a wry smile. "He's demanding, but he challenges me in ways I didn't expect. I've learned a lot from him." Sterling nodded approvingly. "Good. Garrett needs someone who can keep up with him. Too many people in this world are yes men. He doesn't need another one of those." Garrett's grip on her hand tightened briefly, a silent acknowledgement that she'd passed the first test. The rest of the lunch passed in a blur of pleasantries and guarded conversation. Sterling was charming but shrewd, peppering Ellie with questions about her background and subtly testing the validity of their story. By the time dessert arrived, Ellie was exhausted but determined not to let it show. As the waiter cleared the table, Sterling leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Well, Garrett, I have to say I'm impressed. Ellie is a delightful surprise." Garrett inclined his head slightly. "I'm glad you think so." Sterling's gaze shifted to Ellie. "You remind me of my wife when we first met. She had the same fire in her eyes. Don't lose that, Ellie." Ellie smiled, though her nerves still simmered beneath the surface. "I'll do my best, Mr. Sterling." As they left the dining room, Ellie let out a slow breath. The hard part was over, or so she thought. Garrett was silent until they reached the car. Then he turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You did well." Ellie blinked, caught off guard. That almost sounded like a compliment. "It was," Garrett said simply. "But don't let it go to your head. Sterling's approval is only the first step." Ellie frowned. "Is this how it's going to be the whole time? Me proving myself to people who don't even know me?" Garrett's gaze softened slightly, but his tone remained firm. "It's how my world works. You wanted in. This is the price." Ellie crossed her arms, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "I didn't want in. You dragged me into this." Garrett opened his mouth to respond, but his phone buzzed, interrupting him. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. "What is it?" Ellie asked, her irritation giving way to concern. "Nothing you need to worry about," Garrett said, his tone clipped. "We're done for today." Ellie watched him closely as he typed a quick reply, his jaw tight with tension. It was the first crack she'd seen in his otherwise impenetrable exterior, and it left her unsettled. The car ride back to her apartment was silent, the air between them heavy with unspoken words. As they pulled up to her building, Garrett finally spoke. "Tomorrow, we meet Trevor for another round of preparation. Be ready at 9. Ellie nodded, too drained to argue. As she stepped out of the car, she couldn't shake the feeling that this arrangement was about to get far more complicated. Upstairs, she found a missed call from Jack and a text. "Hey, Ellie, everything okay? Call me when you can." Ellie's chest tightened. She'd made it through the first hurdle, but the weight of her brother's trust and the precarious situation she was now tangled in felt heavier than ever. She stared out her window, the city lights twinkling in the distance, and whispered to herself, "What have I gotten myself into?" Unbeknownst to her, Garrett sat in his office across town, his phone still buzzing with messages. One, in particular, caught his attention. A cryptic note from Trevor. "We need to talk. There's something you should know about Sterling." Garrett's eyes narrowed as he leaned back in his chair. The game was just beginning, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the stakes were higher than he'd anticipated. The soft hum of the city filled Ellie's apartment as she stared at the text from Trevor. Her thumb hovered over her phone, uncertainty gnawing at her. She didn't trust Trevor, not completely. His easy charm masked something slippery, something that felt one step away from manipulation. And yet, the words on her screen hinted at something important, something she couldn't ignore. She finally typed back a short reply. "Where?" The response came almost immediately. "Hayes Tower, 10 a.m. Don't tell Garrett." Ellie's stomach twisted. She hated secrets, but something told her this was a conversation she needed to have. She sighed, running her fingers through her hair. This arrangement was already complicated enough without Trevor adding more layers to the chaos. The next morning, Ellie arrived at Hayes Tower earlier than usual. The building was quieter than normal, the buzz of the day not yet in full swing. The receptionist waved her through without question. She was used to seeing Ellie with Garrett by now. Trevor was waiting in a smaller conference room on the 10th floor, his posture relaxed as he leaned against the table. He looked up when Ellie entered, his trademark grin firmly in place. "You're punctual. I like that," Trevor said, straightening. "Let's skip the pleasantries," Ellie replied, crossing her arms. "What's this about, Trevor?" "I don't have time for games." Trevor chuckled, but there was a sharpness in his eyes. "Straight to the point. Garrett chose well." Ellie's patience wore thinner by the second. "Trevor." All right. Trevor raised his hands in mock surrender. "I thought you might want a heads up about Sterling. The man's not as squeaky clean as he pretends to be." Ellie frowned. "What do you mean? He's been nothing but polite." "Polite, yes. Honest? Not so much." Trevor leaned against the table again, his expression darkening. "Walter Sterling has a habit of getting too close to his business partners. He's not just interested in Vision Tech's future, he's interested in controlling it." Ellie's stomach tightened. "You're saying he's trying to manipulate Garrett?" "I'm saying he's already started," Trevor replied, his tone grim. "The gala. That wasn't just a social event. Sterling wanted to see how much leverage he could gain by getting close to you." Ellie's heart raced. "Why me? I'm not even a real part of this world." "Exactly," Trevor said, his grin resurfacing. "You're the wild card, the variable Sterling can't predict, and that makes you a threat or an opportunity, depending on how he decides to play it." Ellie's mind spun as she processed his words. "Why are you telling me this? Shouldn't you be warning Garrett instead?" "Because Garrett won't listen," Trevor said bluntly. "He's too focused on keeping Vision Tech afloat to see what's happening right in front of him. But you've got his ear in ways I don't." Ellie's cheeks flushed, but she ignored the implication. "So, what do you expect me to do?" "Just watch your back," Trevor said, his tone softening. "And keep an eye on Sterling. The man's not as harmless as he seems." Before Ellie could respond, the door opened, and Garrett stepped inside, his expression unreadable. "Ellie," Garrett said, his tone clipped. I didn't realize you'd be meeting with Trevor this morning. Ellie straightened, her nerves prickling under Garrett's sharp gaze. He asked me to stop by. Garrett's eyes flicked to Trevor, suspicion clouding his features. And why would that be? Trevor shrugged, all casual charm. Just getting to know your fiancée a little better. She's fascinating, by the way. You should pay more attention. Ellie's pulse quickened as Garrett's gaze lingered on her. There was something stormy in his expression, something she couldn't quite decipher. Ellie, Garrett said finally, his voice softer. We need to go. The investors' meeting starts in half an hour. Without another word, he turned and left the room. Ellie hesitated, her thoughts still tangled with Trevor's warning, before following Garrett. The meeting was held in a sleek conference room on the top floor of Hayes Tower, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. Garrett took his seat at the head of the table, his usual air of command firmly in place. Ellie sat beside him, feeling out of place among the suits and ties that filled the room. Walter Sterling entered last, his presence as commanding as ever. He greeted Garrett with a firm handshake and a warm smile, but Ellie couldn't shake Trevor's words from her mind. As the meeting progressed, Ellie watched Walter closely. His questions were pointed, his demeanor polished, but there was an undertone of something calculating. He didn't just want answers, he wanted control. Ellie, Walter said suddenly, pulling her out of her thoughts. You've been quiet. What do you think of VisionTech's vision for the future? All eyes turned to her, and Ellie's heart skipped a beat. She glanced at Garrett, who gave her a subtle nod, as if to say, You've got this. She straightened in her seat, summoning every ounce of confidence she could muster. I think VisionTech is exactly what the future needs, she said. It's innovative, forward-thinking, and, most importantly, grounded in integrity. Garrett wouldn't settle for anything less. Walter's gaze lingered on her, his smile faint but unreadable. Well said, he replied. It's clear Garrett has chosen someone who understands his values. Ellie felt Garrett's hand brush hers under the table, a silent gesture of approval. As the meeting wrapped up, Walter approached her privately, his tone low and measured. Ellie, if you ever feel like Garrett isn't being entirely forthcoming with you, I hope you'll come to me. Relationships are built on trust, after all. Ellie stiffened, her instincts screaming that this was more than a casual comment. I appreciate the offer, but Garrett and I are solid, she said, her voice steady. Walter's smile didn't waver. Of course, just know that my door is always open. As he walked away, Ellie's unease deepened. Back in Garrett's office, Ellie finally broke the silence. Trevor was right, she said, her voice low. Garrett looked up from his desk, his brow furrowing. Right about what? Sterling, Ellie said. He's not just interested in VisionTech. He's testing the waters, trying to see how much power he can exert over you. Garrett's expression darkened. Trevor needs to stop filling your head with nonsense. It's not nonsense, Ellie shot back. He approached me, personally, trying to plant doubts about you. Garrett's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stood and walked to the window, his hands in his pockets. Sterling's been a powerful player for decades, Garrett said finally, his tone measured. He's used to getting his way, but I won't let him control me, or VisionTech. Ellie stepped closer, her voice softening. Then don't brush this off. Trevor's warning might not be completely selfless, but he's not wrong. Garrett turned to her, his gaze heavy with something unspoken. I don't need Trevor to protect me, he said, but I appreciate you looking out for me. Ellie's breath caught at the quiet intensity in his voice. For a moment, the walls between them seemed to crack, but then Garrett stepped back, his usual composure sliding back into place. "Go home, Ellie," he said. "I'll handle Sterling." Ellie hesitated, her chest tight with frustration and something she couldn't name. "All right," she said finally. "But don't handle this alone, Garrett. You don't have to." As she left his office, her mind swirled with unanswered questions. Something about Walter Sterling didn't just feel off, it felt dangerous. And she had a sinking feeling that the storm was just beginning. The gallery buzzed with muted conversation, the soft hum of refined music filling the air as Ellie entered the room. She had dressed carefully tonight, her black gown understated yet elegant. Garrett had insisted she attend another high-profile event, a charity auction hosted by one of Walter Sterling's closest allies. Ellie didn't know what unnerved her more, being paraded around like a prize or knowing that Sterling would be there. Garrett stood near the bar, a drink in hand as he spoke with a cluster of well-dressed businessmen. His sharp tuxedo and air of command made him stand out, but Ellie had learned to read the subtle signs of tension in his posture. He caught sight of her and gave a slight nod, his expression softening for a brief moment. "Ellie!" Trevor's voice interrupted her thoughts. He approached, his grin as smooth as ever, looking stunning as usual. "Thanks, Trevor," she said, her tone guarded. "Any particular reason you're hovering, or are you just here to deliver compliments?" Trevor laughed, the sound easy and disarming. "Can't a guy appreciate beauty without an agenda?" Ellie arched an eyebrow, unconvinced. "Not when that guy is you." Trevor smirked, leaning in slightly. "Fair enough. But for the record, tonight's going to be interesting." Ellie's stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" Before Trevor could answer, Garrett appeared at her side, his presence instantly shifting the atmosphere. "Trevor," he said, his tone cool, "don't you have someone else to bother?" "Relax, Garrett," Trevor said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "I was just making small talk." "Make it somewhere else," Garrett replied sharply, his eyes never leaving Trevor's. Trevor gave a short laugh before stepping away, leaving an air of unease behind him. Ellie glanced at Garrett, her brow furrowed. Was that necessary? "With Trevor?" "Always," Garrett said, his voice clipped. He offered her his arm. "Come on, Sterling's expecting us." The auction room was a dazzling display of wealth and sophistication. Art pieces worth more than Ellie could imagine lined the walls, while waitstaff glided through the crowd with trays of champagne. Garrett guided her to a table near the front, where Walter Sterling and his wife Claudia were already seated. "Garrett," Sterling greeted, standing to shake his hand. His sharp gaze shifted to Ellie. "And Ellie, a pleasure to see you again." "Mr. Sterling," Ellie said, her voice steady despite the tension thrumming beneath her skin. "It's good to see you too." "Please sit," Sterling said, gesturing to the empty seats. "We have much to discuss." As they settled in, Ellie noticed Sophia lingering nearby, her eyes darting toward their table with thinly veiled curiosity. When their gazes met, Sophia's lips curved into a knowing smile that made Ellie's pulse quicken. Garrett leaned in close, his voice low. "Ignore her." Easier said than done, Ellie thought. The auction began, and for a while Ellie was content to let the event unfold without incident. But then Sterling leaned toward her, his tone quiet but pointed. "Ellie, I must say you've adapted remarkably well to Garrett's world. It's not an easy transition, is it?" Ellie's chest tightened. She forced a polite smile. "It has its challenges, but I'm managing." Sterling's gaze lingered, and for a moment Ellie felt like he was peeling back the layers of her carefully crafted facade. "You're impressive," he said finally. "But I can't help wondering, how much do you really know about Garrett's plans for vision tech?" Ellie froze. She glanced at Garrett, who was engaged in conversation with Claudia. Her mind raced, trying to decipher Sterling's intentions. "I trust Garrett completely," she said, her voice firm. "He's always been transparent with me. Has he? Sterling asked, his tone dripping with feigned curiosity. Trust is such a fragile thing, Ellie. One crack and the whole foundation crumbles. Ellie opened her mouth to respond, but Garrett's voice cut in. Walter, I think that's enough. Sterling turned to Garrett, his smile cool and unbothered. Just making conversation, Garrett. No harm done. Garrett's jaw tightened, but he didn't press further. Ellie's heart pounded as she realized how close Sterling had come to unraveling her. Later in the evening, Ellie found herself alone near one of the art displays, needing a moment to breathe. The tension from Sterling's comments lingered, gnawing at her confidence. She sipped her champagne, trying to steady herself, when Sophia appeared at her side. Quite the evening, isn't it? Sophia said, her tone light but laced with something sharp. Ellie turned to her, her guard up. Yes, it's been eventful. Sophia tilted her head, studying Ellie with a faint smirk. You're doing well, I'll give you that. But let me offer you some advice. Don't get too comfortable. Garrett has a way of keeping people at arm's length, no matter how close they think they are. Ellie bristled, her grip tightening on her glass. I don't need your advice, Sophia. Suit yourself, Sophia said with a shrug. Just remember, this world is built on appearances, and appearances can be deceiving. Ellie watched as Sophia walked away, her words leaving a bitter taste behind. As the night drew to a close, Garrett found Ellie near the exit, her expression distant. Ready to leave? He asked. More than ready, she replied, her voice flat. The ride back to her apartment was silent, the weight of the evening pressing down on them both. Garrett finally spoke as they pulled up to her building. Sterling crossed a line tonight, he said, his tone low. I'll deal with him. Ellie turned to him, her frustration bubbling to the surface. That's the problem, Garrett. You think you can deal with everything on your own, but this isn't just about you, it's about us. Or at least, the version of us you're trying to sell. Garrett's eyes narrowed. What are you saying? I'm saying that if you want this to work, you need to let me in, Ellie said, her voice trembling with emotion. You can't keep shutting me out and expect me to play my part perfectly. For a moment, Garrett didn't respond. His gaze softened and he looked as though he wanted to say something, but the words never came. Good night, Ellie, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Ellie stepped out of the car, her chest tight with a mix of anger and disappointment. As she walked into her building, she couldn't shake the feeling that the cracks in their facade were beginning to show, and it was only a matter of time before everything fell apart. Upstairs, she found another text waiting for her. Sterling isn't the only one you need to worry about. Call me. It was from Trevor, and Ellie's unease deepened. Ellie's phone buzzed against the counter, its screen lighting up with Trevor's name. She hesitated for a moment before picking it up, pressing it to her ear. What now? She asked, her voice sharper than she intended. Good morning to you too, Trevor replied, his tone as smooth as ever. I thought you'd be a little more excited to hear from me, considering what I know. Ellie rubbed her temples, already feeling the headache coming on. Just get to the point, Trevor. What are you playing at? There was a pause on the other end, and when Trevor spoke again, his voice carried an edge of seriousness that was rare for him. This isn't a game, Ellie. You need to meet me. There's something you should see. Something about Sterling and, well, Garrett too. Her heart skipped a beat, her fingers tightening around the phone. What about Garrett? Not over the phone, Trevor said firmly. Meet me at the old coffee shop on Grand Avenue, 30 minutes. Before Ellie could protest, the line went dead. She stared at the phone, unease creeping up her spine. Whatever Trevor had to say, it wasn't going to be good. The coffee shop was quiet when Ellie arrived, its usual morning rush long gone. Trevor was already seated at a corner table, a black coffee untouched in front of him. He looked up as she approached, his expression unusually grim. "I was starting to think you'd changed your mind," Trevor said, motioning for her to sit. Ellie slid into the chair across from him, crossing her arms. "Start talking." Trevor leaned back, studying her for a moment before pulling a folder from his bag and sliding it across the table. "Take a look." Ellie opened the folder, her eyes scanning the documents inside. They were contracts, emails, and financial statements, most of them bearing the Sterling Industries letterhead. But what caught her attention was a series of handwritten notes in the margins of one of the contracts, all in Walter Sterling's handwriting. Hayes Partnership Leverage Opportunities, Tech Acquisition Targets, Contingency Plan, Dissolve Vision Tech Brand Post-Integration. Ellie's stomach churned as she read the words. He's planning to dismantle Vision Tech? Trevor nodded. It's worse than that. Sterling doesn't just want to buy in, he wants to take over, and once he does, Garrett will be out. Completely. Ellie's mind raced, piecing together the implications. Does Garrett know about this? Trevor shook his head. Not the full extent. Sterling's been playing nice, making him think this is a partnership. But these documents tell a different story. Ellie leaned back in her chair, her thoughts a tangled mess. Why are you telling me this? Why not go straight to Garrett? Trevor's eyes darkened. Because Garrett's blinded by desperation. He's under so much pressure to save Vision Tech that he's not thinking clearly. But you can get through to him. Ellie stared at him, torn between frustration and gratitude. Why do I feel like there's more to this? Trevor hesitated, and for a moment Ellie saw a flicker of vulnerability in his usually confident demeanor. Because there is. Sterling isn't the only one trying to sabotage Vision Tech. Her pulse quickened. Who else? Trevor's jaw tightened. Declan Wyatt. He's been quietly working behind the scenes, using Sterling as a pawn. If Sterling takes control, Wyatt will swoop in and gut the company. Ellie's hands trembled as she closed the folder. Why would Sterling let that happen? Because he doesn't know, Trevor said. Wyatt's playing him too. And if we don't stop this, Garrett's going to lose everything. Ellie spent the rest of the day in a haze, the weight of the revelations pressing down on her. She wanted to tell Garrett immediately, but something held her back. Would he even believe her? Or would he brush her off like he had before? By the time she arrived at Hayes Tower, the sun was beginning to set, casting the city in a golden glow. Garrett was in his office, standing by the window with a drink in hand. He turned as she entered, his expression softening for a moment before hardening again. "You're late," he said, his tone clipped. Ellie ignored the comment, closing the door behind her. "We need to talk." Garrett raised an eyebrow, setting his glass down. "About?" "Sterling," Ellie said, stepping closer. "And Declan Wyatt." Garrett's eyes narrowed. "What about them?" Ellie hesitated, her heart pounding. "Trevor showed me some documents. Sterling isn't planning a partnership. He's planning a takeover. And Wyatt's behind the whole thing." For a moment, Garrett said nothing, his expression unreadable. Then he shook his head, letting out a bitter laugh. "Trevor, of course." "I'm serious, Garrett," Ellie said, her voice rising. "This isn't just some conspiracy theory. I saw the proof." Garrett crossed his arms, his jaw tight. "And you believed him? Trevor's been angling for control of Vision Tech since day one. He'll say anything to undermine Sterling." Ellie stepped forward, her frustration bubbling over. "This isn't about Trevor. This is about you losing everything because you're too stubborn to listen." Garrett's eyes flashed with anger. "You think I don't know what's at stake? I built this company from nothing, Ellie. Every decision I make is to protect it." "Then act like it," Ellie shot back, her voice trembling. "Stop pretending you can handle this alone and let me help you." The room fell silent, the tension between them crackling like a live wire. Garrett stared at her, his chest rising and falling as he struggled to keep his emotions in check. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "Why do you care so much?" Ellie's breath caught, the question catching her off guard. For a moment, she didn't know how to answer. Then she stepped closer, her voice softening. "Because you're not as invincible as you think you are," she said. "And if you fall, you'll take everyone else down with you." Garrett's gaze softened, the walls around him beginning to crack. But before either of them could say more, his phone buzzed on the desk. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. "It's Sterling. I have to take this." Ellie nodded, stepping back. "Just think about what I said." Garrett watched her leave, a storm brewing in his eyes. As he answered the call, his thoughts were no longer on Sterling. They were on Ellie and the truths she had forced him to confront. In the elevator, Ellie leaned against the wall, her chest tight with a mix of anger and fear. She had done everything she could to warn Garrett, but the next move was his, and deep down, she wasn't sure if he would make the right one. The stakes were higher than ever, and the clock was ticking. The sterile hum of Hayes Tower's conference room was broken by the low murmur of voices. Garrett Hayes sat at the head of the long glass table, his sharp suit immaculate, his face a mask of control. Across from him sat Walter Sterling, his cool gaze meeting Garrett's with calculated ease. Around them, a handful of executives and advisors shuffled papers and exchanged whispers, but the true battle was happening in the silence between their words. Ellie sat to Garrett's left, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her pulse raced, every instinct screaming that this meeting was the calm before a storm. She caught Garrett's eye for a brief moment, but his expression betrayed nothing. "Mr. Hayes," Sterling began, his tone smooth, "I want to commend you on the progress Vision Tech has made in recent months. It's rare to see such forward-thinking leadership in this industry." Garrett nodded slightly, his voice measured. "Thank you, Walter. Vision Tech's progress is a reflection of our team's dedication and innovation." Ellie fought the urge to roll her eyes. Garrett's diplomatic tone was impeccable, but she knew the stakes of this conversation were far from polite. Her gaze flicked to Sterling, who was smiling faintly, the picture of confidence. It was unnerving. "However," Sterling continued, leaning forward slightly, "progress is often stifled by hesitation, which is why I'd like to suggest expediting our partnership, finalizing the terms, and moving forward with integration by the end of the quarter." Ellie's heart sank. She glanced at Garrett, whose jaw tightened imperceptibly. "That's a significant acceleration," Garrett said carefully. "I'd prefer to ensure all aspects are thoroughly vetted before making such a substantial move." Sterling's smile didn't waver, but there was a glint in his eye. "I understand your caution, but opportunities like this don't wait, Garrett. Hesitation could mean falling behind, something I know you can't afford." The tension in the room was palpable. Garrett leaned back slightly, his fingers steepled. "I appreciate your enthusiasm, Walter, but Vision Tech's future requires careful consideration. I won't risk the company's stability for the sake of expediency." Sterling's gaze sharpened, and Ellie felt a chill run down her spine. Before Sterling could respond, the door to the conference room opened, and Trevor walked in, his expression unusually grim. "Apologies for the interruption," Trevor said, his tone unusually serious. "But there's something that can't wait." Garrett's eyes narrowed, annoyance flashing across his face. "This is a closed meeting, Trevor." "I know," Trevor said, his gaze flicking to Sterling. "But this is urgent, and I think everyone here needs to hear it." The room fell silent as Trevor placed a folder on the table and slid it toward Garrett. "Take a look." Garrett hesitated for a moment before opening the folder. Ellie watched as his expression shifted, the faintest flicker of shock crossing his features before his face hardened. He turned the folder around, laying it open for everyone to see. Inside were documents, emails, contracts, and financial records, detailing a plan to dissolve VisionTech's brand and absorb its assets under Sterling Industries. Ellie recognized the documents Trevor had shown her at the coffee shop. "Care to explain this, Walter?" Garrett's voice was cold, each word cutting like glass. Sterling didn't flinch. He leaned back in his chair, his expression unbothered. "It's simple business, Garrett. VisionTech is a valuable asset, but its potential is limited under its current structure. Integration with Sterling Industries would allow it to reach new heights." Garrett's fists clenched on the table. "Integration? This isn't integration. It's a hostile takeover disguised as a partnership." Sterling's gaze hardened, the warmth in his demeanor evaporating. "Hostile? Hardly. I've given you every opportunity to work with me, Garrett. But your stubbornness is holding you back. If you won't evolve, you'll become obsolete." Ellie's heart pounded as the tension in the room reached its peak. Garrett's voice dropped, low and dangerous. "VisionTech is mine. I built it from the ground up, and I won't let you dismantle it." Sterling stood, his movements deliberate and controlled. "You're playing a dangerous game, Garrett. Think carefully about your next move. Opportunities like this don't come twice." With that, Sterling turned and walked out, his advisors trailing behind him. The door closed with a heavy thud, leaving the room in stunned silence. Garrett paced his office later that evening, his usual composure shattered. Ellie stood by the window, watching him with a mix of concern and frustration. "Garrett," she said softly, but he didn't respond. His hands were clenched into fists, his jaw tight with barely contained rage. "Why didn't you tell me about this earlier?" he demanded suddenly, turning to face her. Ellie flinched at the anger in his voice. "I tried. I told you Sterling wasn't trustworthy, but you wouldn't listen." Garrett's eyes flashed with guilt, but he didn't back down. "You should have pushed harder." Ellie's frustration boiled over. "Do you even hear yourself? You're blaming me because you refused to see what was right in front of you." Garrett's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. He ran a hand through his hair, his voice quieter now. "You're right. I should have seen it. But now it's too late." "It's not too late," Ellie said firmly, stepping closer. "Sterling hasn't won yet. You can still fight this, but you have to trust me. Trust Trevor. You can't do this alone, Garrett." Garrett met her gaze, something raw and vulnerable flickering in his eyes. "I don't know how to trust anyone anymore." Ellie placed a hand on his arm, her voice soft but steady. "Then start with me." For a moment, the walls Garrett had so carefully constructed seemed to crumble. He looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time, his expression a mix of gratitude and something deeper. "All right," he said finally. "We fight. Together." The next morning, Garrett, Ellie, and Trevor convened in Garrett's office, their strategy coming together piece by piece. They worked tirelessly, poring over every document, every detail that could expose Sterling's true intentions. By the time evening fell, the plan was set. Garrett would confront Sterling at a high-profile tech summit the following day, presenting irrefutable evidence of his duplicity. It was a bold move, one that could either save VisionTech or destroy it. As Ellie left the office that night, exhaustion weighed on her, but so did hope. For the first time, she felt like they had a chance, but deep down, she knew the battle was far from over. The real fight was just beginning. The air inside the tech summit was thick with anticipation, the kind that made every conversation buzz louder and every movement feel more significant. Vision Tech had secured a prime slot on the agenda, and Garrett Hayes was set to present the company's vision for the future. But today wasn't just about vision, it was about survival. Ellie Carter stood off to the side of the stage, her heart pounding as she scanned the packed auditorium. Tech leaders, investors, and journalists filled the space, their attention focused on the sleek stage where Garrett would soon step into the spotlight. She smoothed the fabric of her blazer, trying to quiet her nerves. Garrett had insisted she be here, a sign of trust she hadn't expected. But now that the moment was here, she wasn't sure she could handle the pressure. Trevor Blake stood beside her, his usual smirk absent. He leaned in slightly, his voice low. "You think he's ready for this?" Ellie nodded, though her hands betrayed her tension, clenched tightly around the folder she carried. "He has to be." Trevor's lips twitched, almost forming a grin. "You've got faith in him. That's more than most people can say." Ellie didn't respond, her eyes fixed on Garrett as he paced backstage, reviewing his notes one last time. His usual air of control was still intact, but she knew him well enough now to see the cracks. The weight of this presentation, and the confrontation it would bring, was a burden even he couldn't ignore. The sound of applause signaled the end of the previous speaker's segment. A voice boomed over the speakers, introducing Garrett Hayes as the next presenter. Garrett took a deep breath, straightened his tie, and walked onto the stage. The room erupted into applause, cameras flashing as he approached the podium. Garrett scanned the crowd, his face calm but his eyes sharp. "Good afternoon," he began, his deep voice carrying through the auditorium. Vision Tech was founded on the belief that innovation isn't just about creating something new, it's about creating something better. Today, I'd like to share how we plan to do just that. The audience leaned in, captivated as Garrett detailed Vision Tech's latest breakthroughs in AI development. But as he spoke, Ellie noticed a subtle shift in the room. People weren't just impressed, they were waiting, watching. Sterling's shadow loomed large, even here. Ellie's phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at the screen and froze. A message from an unknown number. "Watch your back. Sterling won't go down without a fight." Her chest tightened, and she looked around the room, suddenly feeling exposed. She spotted Walter Sterling seated in the front row, his expression as polished as ever. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of amusement, of challenge. Ellie leaned toward Trevor. "Something's wrong. Sterling's too calm." Trevor followed her gaze, his jaw tightening. "He's always calm. That's what makes him dangerous." Garrett's voice broke through their hushed exchange. But Vision Tech's future isn't just about growth, it's about integrity, which is why transparency has always been at the heart of our mission. The subtle emphasis on the word transparency wasn't lost on anyone. Garrett paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. "Unfortunately," he continued, his tone growing colder, "not everyone in this industry shares those values." Murmurs rippled through the audience as Garrett reached for the folder Ellie had handed him before the presentation. He held it up, his gaze fixed on the crowd. "These documents," he said, his voice steady, "contain evidence of a planned hostile takeover of Vision Tech, a plan orchestrated under the guise of partnership by none other than Walter Sterling." The room erupted in gasps and whispers. Cameras turned toward Sterling, whose calm facade remained intact even as all eyes fell on him. "I've always believed that partnerships should be built on trust," Garrett continued, his words slicing through the noise. "But trust requires honesty, and honesty has been notably absent in Mr. Sterling's dealings with Vision Tech." Ellie watched as the tension in the room escalated, the murmurs growing louder. Sterling stood, adjusting his tie as he addressed the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice smooth and unbothered. "Mr. Hayes is understandably protective of his company, but I must correct the record. My intentions have always been to support Vision Tech's growth, not hinder it." "Support?" Garrett countered, his voice sharp. "These documents show otherwise. They outline your plan to dismantle Vision Tech and absorb its assets into Sterling Industries. Care to explain?" Sterling's lips curved into a faint smile, the kind that could disarm a weaker opponent. "Business strategies are always fluid, Garrett. Plans evolve, but accusations like these, made in such a public forum, are not only unprofessional, but unfounded." Ellie's fists clenched at Sterling's audacity. She stepped closer to the edge of the stage, resisting the urge to shout the truth herself. Garrett's voice cut through the chaos, firm and unyielding. "If these accusations are unfounded, then you won't mind an independent audit of Sterling Industries' communications with Vision Tech. Transparency, after all, is what we should all strive for. Don't you agree?" The challenge hung in the air, and for the first time Sterling hesitated. It was slight, almost imperceptible, but it was there. "Of course," Sterling said finally, his smile faltering just enough to reveal the cracks. "I have nothing to hide." Garrett nodded, his expression triumphant. "Good. Then let's begin immediately." The room burst into applause, the crowd clearly siding with Garrett. Sterling's exit was swift and controlled, but Ellie could see the tension in his shoulders as he left the auditorium. He wasn't used to losing. Not like this. Backstage, Garrett exhaled heavily, leaning against the wall as the adrenaline drained from his body. Ellie approached cautiously, unsure if he needed space or support. "You were incredible out there," she said softly, her voice filled with admiration. Garrett looked up at her, his eyes weary but grateful. "I couldn't have done it without you." Ellie's breath caught at the vulnerability in his voice. She took a step closer, her gaze locking with his. "You did this, Garrett. You fought for what you built, and you won." For a moment, the walls between them crumbled completely. Garrett reached out, his hand brushing hers. "Ellie, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just promise me you'll stop shutting me out." Garrett's grip on her hand tightened slightly, his gaze softening. "I promise." The sound of footsteps interrupted the moment, and Trevor appeared, his grin wide. "You did it, Hayes. Sterling's running scared." Garrett straightened, his composure slipping back into place. "It's not over yet. Sterling will come back swinging." "And we'll be ready," Trevor said confidently. He glanced at Ellie, his smirk turning teasing. "You've got a hell of an ally in her." Garrett's eyes lingered on Ellie, something unspoken passing between them. "I know." As they left the venue together, Ellie felt a surge of hope. For the first time, it felt like they weren't just fighting to protect Vision Tech. They were fighting for something deeper, something worth holding on to. But even as the victory settled, Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that the battle wasn't over. Not yet. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and white as the cars sped through the streets. Garrett Hayes sat in the back seat, staring out the window, his thoughts a storm of triumph, exhaustion, and unease. The confrontation with Walter Sterling had been a gamble, one that paid off in the public's eye. But Garrett knew better. Sterling wouldn't walk away quietly. Beside him, Ellie Carter sat with her hands folded in her lap, her posture calm but her eyes distant. The quiet between them wasn't uncomfortable, but it was heavy, each of them lost in their own thoughts. Garrett turned to her, his voice breaking the silence. "You were right," he said, his tone softer than usual. About Sterling, about everything. Ellie blinked, surprised by his sudden vulnerability. I didn't do anything you wouldn't have done for yourself. You just needed someone to remind you that you don't have to fight alone. Garrett's gaze lingered on her, a flicker of something unspoken crossing his face. Still, I owe you. Ellie smiled faintly, but before she could respond, the driver pulled up in front of her apartment building. She hesitated, her hand on the door handle. You should get some rest, Garrett. Tomorrow's going to be another battle. I'll walk you up, Garrett offered, his voice firm. Ellie turned to him, startled by the gesture. That's not necessary. It's not about necessity, Garrett said, already stepping out of the car. Come on. The climb to Ellie's apartment was quiet, but the charged silence between them spoke volumes. When they reached her door, Ellie turned to face him, her key poised in the lock. You didn't have to do this, she said softly. Garrett smirked faintly. I know. For a moment, they stood there, the city sounds muffled in the hallway. Garrett's usual armor was gone, replaced by a quiet intensity that made Ellie's chest tighten. She wanted to say something, to bridge the space between them, but the words wouldn't come. Good night, Ellie, Garrett said finally, his voice low. Good night, she whispered, watching as he turned and walked back down the hall. She closed the door behind her, leaning against it as she let out a shaky breath. Garrett Hayes was an enigma, one she couldn't stop trying to unravel. The next morning, Hayes Tower buzzed with an electric urgency. Garrett had called an emergency meeting with his executive team, determined to capitalize on the momentum from the tech summit. Ellie arrived early, her focus sharpened by the knowledge that Sterling's retaliation was inevitable. As she entered the conference room, she found Trevor already there, scrolling through his phone with a grim expression. Morning, Ellie said, setting her bag down. Morning, Trevor replied without looking up. He hesitated before speaking again. Sterling's already making moves. Ellie's heart sank. What kind of moves? Trevor handed her his phone, the screen displaying an article from a major business news outlet. The headline read, Garrett Hayes accused of misleading investors, Sterling Industries releases statement. Ellie scanned the article, her blood boiling as she read Sterling's carefully worded accusations. The statement painted Garrett as reckless, accusing him of fabricating claims to discredit Sterling Industries. It was a calculated attack designed to sow doubt among VisionTech's partners and stakeholders. He's trying to turn the narrative against Garrett, Ellie said, her voice tight. Trevor nodded, and he's good at it. Sterling's reputation is solid. People will believe him unless Garrett counters this fast. Before Ellie could respond, Garrett entered the room, his expression a mix of anger and determination. He tossed a printout of the article onto the table, his jaw tight. Sterling's playing dirty, he said, but I won't let him win. We need a counterstrike, Trevor said. Something bold, public, a show of strength. Garrett nodded, his eyes narrowing. I'm not just going to defend myself. I'm going to expose Sterling for the fraud he is. We've got the evidence, and I'm not afraid to use it. Ellie stepped forward, her voice steady. You need to be strategic, Garrett. This can't just be about retaliation. It has to be about proving why VisionTech is better than what Sterling offers. Garrett's gaze softened slightly as he looked at her. You're right, as usual. Trevor smirked. She's good for you, Hayes. Garrett ignored the comment, already turning to the whiteboard to outline their next steps. By midday, VisionTech's team had launched a coordinated response. Press releases, social media statements, and internal communications all emphasized the company's commitment to innovation and integrity. Garrett's voice echoed in every message, a stark contrast to Sterling's polished attacks. Ellie worked tirelessly alongside Garrett, her creativity and insight proving invaluable as they crafted the company's narrative. But even as they made progress, the tension between them grew. The unspoken connection that had been simmering for weeks now felt impossible to ignore. Late that evening, as the office emptied out, Garrett found Ellie in the break room, staring at a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. "Still here?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. Ellie looked up, a tired smile tugging at her lips. "I could ask you the same thing." Garrett stepped closer, his expression thoughtful. "I've been meaning to say something." Ellie raised an eyebrow, her heart skipping a beat. "What is it?" He hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "This arrangement. It was supposed to be simple, business, but it's become more than that." Ellie's breath caught, her pulse racing as she tried to process his words. "Garrett." "I know this isn't easy for you," he interrupted, his voice quieter now. "And I know I haven't made it easier. But I don't want to lose what we've built. Not just Vision Tech. Us." Ellie stared at him, her chest tight with a mix of emotions she couldn't name. For so long, she'd convinced herself this was just a job, a means to an end. But now, standing here with Garrett, she couldn't deny the truth. "I don't want to lose it either," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Garrett stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "Then let's fight for it, together." For a moment, the rest of the world faded away. It was just them, standing on the edge of something new, something fragile but real. And for the first time, Ellie felt like they might actually win. Not just against Sterling, but against the odds that had been stacked against them from the start. "All right," she said softly. "Together." Garrett's lips curved into a small, genuine smile. "Together." As the city lights glittered outside, the two of them stood there, united in a way that felt unshakable. But deep down, Ellie knew the hardest battles were still ahead, and she was ready to face them no matter what. The crisp morning air of San Francisco felt heavy as Ellie Carter made her way to Hayes Tower. The battle lines had been drawn, and today was the day Garrett Hayes would face Walter Sterling head-on in a pivotal board meeting. Sterling had called it under the guise of addressing investor concerns, but everyone knew it was an ambush, a last-ditch effort to undermine Vision Tech's leadership and seize control. Ellie's chest tightened as she stepped out of the elevator and into the bustling office. The energy was different today, tense, charged, like the air before a thunderstorm. Employees whispered in clusters, their faces etched with worry. The stakes were higher than ever, and everyone knew it. Garrett was in his office, standing by the window with his back to the room. The city skyline stretched out before him, but his focus was elsewhere. Ellie paused in the doorway, watching him for a moment. He looked calm, composed, but she knew better. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand gripped the edge of the desk. "Garrett," she said softly, stepping inside. He turned, his piercing gaze locking onto hers. For a moment, the weight of the day hung between them, unspoken but understood. "Ellie," he said, his voice steady, "you didn't have to come in this early." She crossed the room, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "I'm not going to sit this one out. We're in this together, remember?" Garrett's lips curved into a faint smile, the smallest crack in his armor. "I remember." Trevor entered the office then, his usual swagger muted. He carried a stack of folders, his expression uncharacteristically serious. "The boardroom's ready," Trevor announced, setting the folders on Garrett's desk. "Sterling's already there, along with half the board. He's brought his people, Garrett. This isn't going to be easy." Garrett nodded, his jaw tightening. "It never is." The boardroom was a battlefield. The long mahogany table gleamed under the fluorescent lights, its polished surface reflecting the tension that filled the room. Walter Sterling sat near the head of the table, his calm, confident demeanor exuding control. His advisers flanked him, their sharp suits and practiced smiles a testament to their calculated preparation. Garrett entered the room with Ellie and Trevor at his side. The conversation hushed, all eyes turning to him. He moved with purpose, his every step a statement of defiance. Ellie could feel the weight of the stares, the unspoken judgments, but Garrett seemed unfazed. "Mr. Hayes," Sterling said smoothly, standing to greet him, "thank you for joining us." Garrett's smile was thin, his voice clipped. "I didn't realize I had a choice." Sterling chuckled, a sound as polished as it was insincere. "Of course. Please, take a seat." Garrett didn't reply. He sat at the head of the table, his posture commanding. Ellie took the seat to his right, her presence a subtle but deliberate statement. She was here, and she wasn't going anywhere. The meeting began with the usual formalities, but it didn't take long for Sterling to steer the conversation toward his agenda. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sterling said, standing as he addressed the room, "we're at a critical juncture in VisionTech's history. While Mr. Hayes has done an admirable job leading this company, recent events have raised questions about his ability to navigate the challenges ahead." Ellie's fists clenched under the table, but she forced herself to stay composed. Garrett, however, remained calm, his gaze locked on Sterling like a predator watching its prey. "What questions are you referring to, Walter?" Garrett asked, his tone deceptively casual. Sterling's smile didn't falter. "The accusations you've leveled against Sterling Industries, for one. Baseless claims that have tarnished both of our reputations in the eyes of investors." "Baseless?" Garrett said, leaning forward slightly. "The documents we presented at the summit were clear, or are you suggesting they were fabricated?" Sterling hesitated, the first crack in his polished facade. "I'm suggesting that your interpretation was misguided." Trevor snorted quietly, earning a glare from one of Sterling's advisers. Ellie glanced at Garrett, whose expression had turned icy. "Misguided," Garrett repeated, his voice low and dangerous. "Let's talk about what's really misguided, Walter. Like your attempts to manipulate this board into thinking you're VisionTech's savior when all you've done is undermine its future." A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. Sterling's calm began to falter, his jaw tightening as he struggled to regain control. "Enough!" Sterling snapped, his voice sharper than intended. "This isn't about me. This is about VisionTech and the fact that it needs stronger leadership to survive." Ellie couldn't stay silent any longer. She leaned forward, her voice steady but firm. "VisionTech doesn't need stronger leadership. It already has it. Garrett has built this company from the ground up, and he's fought harder than anyone to protect it. That's what real leadership looks like." Sterling turned to her, his smile brittle. "Ms. Carter, while I admire your loyalty, I'm afraid you don't fully understand the complexities of—" "I understand more than you think," Ellie interrupted, her gaze unwavering. "And what I see is a man who's willing to destroy a company just to satisfy his own ego." The room fell silent, the weight of Ellie's words hanging heavy in the air. Sterling's face darkened, but before he could respond, Garrett spoke. "Ellie's right," he said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "VisionTech isn't just a company to me. It's my life's work, and I won't let you or anyone else take that away." Sterling stood, his expression cold. "Then I suppose we're at an impasse." Garrett's eyes narrowed. Not for long. The meeting adjourned with no resolution, but the battle was far from over. Garrett and Ellie returned to his office, the adrenaline still coursing through their veins. "You were incredible in there," Garrett said, turning to her. "I don't think anyone's ever stood up to Sterling like that." Ellie smiled faintly, her heart still racing. "I couldn't just sit there and let him tear you down." Garrett stepped closer, his gaze softening. You didn't just stand up for me. You reminded me why I started this fight in the first place." Ellie's breath caught, the intensity in his eyes leaving her speechless. For a moment, the world around them seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them. "Garrett," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. But before she could say more, his phone buzzed on the desk, shattering the moment. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. "It's Sterling." Ellie's stomach tightened. What does he want now? Garrett picked up the phone, his jaw tightening as he read the message. "He wants a private meeting. Tonight." Ellie's heart sank. "Do you think it's a trap?" "Probably," Garrett said, his voice grim. "But I don't have a choice. If there's a chance to end this, I have to take it." Ellie grabbed his arm, her grip firm. "Then I'm coming with you." Garrett hesitated, his gaze searching hers. "Ellie." "No arguments," she said firmly. "We're in this together, remember?" Garrett's lips curved into a small, reluctant smile. "All right. Together." As they prepared for the meeting, Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that this was the turning point, the moment that would decide everything, and she was determined to face it, no matter what. The private conference room was eerily quiet, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound as Garrett and Ellie entered. Walter Sterling was already seated at the sleek glass table, his fingers steepled, his expression unreadable. Behind him stood two of his advisors, their stoic faces betraying nothing. The dim lighting cast long shadows across the room, heightening the tension. Ellie's pulse quickened as she glanced at Garrett. His face was composed, but she could feel the undercurrent of determination radiating off him. She placed a reassuring hand on his arm before taking the seat beside him. "Walter," Garrett said, his tone clipped, "let's get to it. What's so urgent that it couldn't wait until morning?" Sterling leaned back in his chair, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Straight to business. I've always admired that about you, Garrett." He paused, his eyes flicking to Ellie. "And Ms. Carter. How charming that you've joined us." Ellie met his gaze without flinching. "I'm not here to charm you, Mr. Sterling." Sterling's smile widened slightly, but there was no humor in it. "Of course not. You're here to protect Garrett. Admirable, really. But I'm afraid tonight's conversation is about matters far beyond your influence." Garrett's jaw tightened. "If this is another one of your games, Walter, I'm not interested." "Oh, this is no game," Sterling said, leaning forward. "This is an offer, one that could save you a great deal of trouble." Ellie's heart sank, dread coiling in her stomach. "What kind of offer?" Sterling ignored her, his gaze fixed on Garrett. "You've made quite the spectacle of yourself these past few days, Garrett. Publicly accusing me, rallying your troops. But you and I both know that battles like this don't end with grand speeches or public opinion. They end behind closed doors." Garrett's eyes narrowed. "Get to the point." "The point," Sterling said, his voice hardening, "is that you've pushed me into a corner, and I don't like being cornered. So here's my offer. Walk away. Step down as CEO, sell me your shares of Vision Tech, and I'll ensure the company thrives under new leadership. You'll be well compensated, of course." Ellie couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You want him to hand over everything he's built? Just like that?" Sterling's gaze flicked to her, a trace of irritation in his expression. "It's not a request, Ms. Carter. It's an inevitability. The question is whether Garrett will do so on his terms or mine." Garrett leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Sterling's. "And if I refuse?" Sterling's smile turned cold. "Then I'll do what I've always done, Garrett. I'll find a way to win. I've already planted seeds of doubt among your investors. A little more pressure, and they'll turn on you. The board will have no choice but to remove you. And when that happens, I'll pick up the pieces for a fraction of what I'm offering now." Ellie's hands clenched into fists under the table. You can't just— Enough, Ellie, Garrett said, his voice firm but gentle. He turned his attention back to Sterling, his gaze like steel. You think you've already won, don't you? Sterling's silence was answer enough. Garrett smiled, but there was no warmth in it. That's your biggest mistake, Walter. Underestimating me. Because while you've been plotting and scheming, I've been building something you can't destroy. Sterling raised an eyebrow. And what might that be? Trust, Garrett said simply. Not just with my team, but with my investors, my employees, and the people who believe in vision tech. You might be able to buy their fear, but you can't buy their loyalty. The room fell silent, the weight of Garrett's words hanging heavy in the air. Ellie's chest swelled with pride as she watched him stand his ground, refusing to back down. Sterling's smile finally faded, replaced by a hard, calculating expression. You're playing a dangerous game, Garrett. Garrett stood, his movements deliberate. I've been playing this game my whole life, Walter, and I've learned that the only way to win is to stand for something bigger than yourself. Ellie rose with him, her voice steady as she added, and that's something you'll never understand. Sterling's gaze darkened, but he said nothing as Garrett and Ellie turned and walked out of the room. The heavy door closed behind them with a soft click, leaving Sterling and his advisors in silence. The elevator ride down felt like a victory march. Garrett leaned against the wall, his eyes closed for a moment as the tension began to ease. Ellie glanced at him, her voice soft. You were incredible in there. Garrett opened his eyes, his gaze meeting hers. I couldn't have done it without you. She smiled, but her expression quickly grew serious. Do you think he'll back down? No, Garrett admitted. But that doesn't matter. We've exposed him. The board will see the truth. And if he tries anything else, we'll be ready. Ellie nodded, her resolve matching his. We're not just fighting for vision tech anymore. We're fighting for everything it stands for. Garrett reached out, his hand brushing hers. And we're going to win. Together. The elevator doors opened, and the crisp night air greeted them as they stepped out onto the street. For the first time in weeks, Ellie felt a glimmer of hope. Hope that they could overcome whatever challenges lay ahead. As they walked away from Hayes Tower, Garrett glanced at Ellie, his voice quiet but filled with conviction. No matter what happens, Ellie, I want you to know something. She looked up at him, her heart pounding. What's that? He hesitated for a moment before saying, You're more than just my partner in this fight. You're the reason I've kept fighting. Ellie's breath caught, her chest tightening as she searched his eyes. There, in his gaze, was the truth she'd been too afraid to acknowledge. And you're mine, she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. They stopped under the glow of a street lamp, the world around them fading as they stood together. Garrett reached for her hand, his touch steady and sure. No matter what happens, he said softly, we'll face it together. Ellie nodded, her voice barely audible. Together. As they walked into the night, the weight of their journey behind them, and the promise of a brighter future ahead, Ellie knew one thing for certain. They weren't just fighting for vision tech. They were fighting for each other, and together they were unstoppable.